How's it going, everybody? My name is Infamous Isaac, and welcome to part 2 for Lostbelt 6, where I'm going to cover Act 2. And let me state this, I knew this act was long, but I did not think it was going to be this long when I started working on the video, in terms of time and effort put into it, and just overall the video length. This video, though, took a lot more out of me than I thought it actually would. I had a blast doing it, but it is something new to me because of how long it actually is. So by the time I finished, I was just burnt out. So if you enjoyed, please consider liking and subscribing. If you don't, that's perfectly fine too. The fact that you clicked on the video or had any interest in it means a lot more than you would know. But without further ado, I introduce to all of you lovely viewers, Lost Belt 6, Act 2. Enjoy. So, to get into the non-spoilers for Act 2 of Lost Belt 6, I am going to be comparing it a little bit, and I'm not going to spoil what happens in Act 1, but I am going to be drawing comparisons to both of them, right? With the way that I feel, at least. If I had to describe Act 1 for people that didn't see that video with no spoilers, basically it's the story drawing you in with some history, some detail, and overall fun and enjoyable characters. And I love that, right? It's what made me fall in love with Atlantis. But what separates Lost Belt 6 from stories like Atlantis or any other Lost Belt is that this Lost Belt has time to build and develop the world and the story and the characters and overall what's going on in this situation. So if Lost Belt 6 is just a puzzle set, Act 1 is building the border of the puzzle with maybe one or two pieces in the middle, right? You don't know where they go. Act 2 is giving you the middle, filling out almost the entirety of it, with Act 3 hopefully filling out the rest of it. So, to expand on Act 2 more specifically, it has the history, the characters, and overall a lot of the knowledge that you need to have an almost full understanding of the story. So Act 1 is the mystery, while Act 2 is the solution. And if you didn't know, if you don't play the game or if you haven't gotten to Lost Belt 6 yet, there's actually like a little tab that shows the table of contents for each age in history for Lost Belt 6. The game really promotes you learning and remembering what is going on in this Lost Belt so you can truly understand the story that all the people who wrote this tried to build. It's actually impressive how much everybody wrote for this story. It's not about the character amount or the word count. It's literally just the depth of the story to the point where this could be its own story. And what I mean by that is because this is a mobile gacha game, the production value is inherently lower to fit a phone's needs. But this could genuinely be passed off as a visual novel if you port it and redesign it to fit console or computer needs. And that's based off of the merit of how well written this story actually is. And so, to describe my final thoughts on Lost Belt 6 Act 2, I can basically come to the consensus that this just only amplifies Act 1 and solidifies the fact that Lost Belt 6 is just the best story content that we've ever gotten in this game. My complaints with Act 2 really boil down to the info dumping in some sections and just how long it is in general. It has nothing to do with the lore itself because the lore is perfectly fine. It's just in certain points, the way that it's presented to me is just too much to digest and I need to take a break from it. But in my opinion, on a positive note, that's a testament to how good the story is because my complaints issue more on the presentation of that story instead of the story itself because the story to me is perfectly fine. So overall, if I had to give Act 2 a rating, it would definitely be a 9 out of 10. Well, it's not a 9.5 material like Act 1 is. This story is still amazing. The characters are great. The lore was amazing. The world building. And overall, just how it progressed and how the story is going to end in the next act is just so engaging. But now we're going to move on to the spoilers for Lost Belt 6 Act 2. So, as per usual, know that I'm going to be going into spoiler details for Lost Belt 6 Act 2. This one is a hefty one, and I highly recommend not watching this video if you haven't played or read or seen anything on Lost Belt 6 entirely. A lot of information in this Lost Belt hinges on you not having read anything on it, you know? Maybe having knowledge on who these characters are in real history, but not for the Lost Belt itself. So if you are going in completely blind, then keep that as a virtue. That is a blessing. But without further ado, let me begin. Act 2 begins with a prologue, basically reintroducing us to the world of Fairy Britain. And the way that this is done is by having the Stormbirder crew read off Da Vinci's reports that she's been giving them throughout our journey so far. You have Holmes and you have Gordoff reading them in their own ways. Gordoff reading it aloud to the crew, and this sparks conversation about who Morgan Le Fay really is, right? Because Nemo or Captain doesn't know her lore, and so Holmes goes into the details about her, basically talking about the three variations of her: the human version, Morgan herself. You have Vivian, who's the Lady of the Lake, and then you have Morgan Le Fay, who's the Fairy Britain Queen, created from Britain itself, like Vortigern, right? And it's just going, in a sense, talking about all these versions, the history surrounding her actual lore, and just overall, is there a good version of her, or is it all just bad and stuff like that? Mounier has a comment like, with the Lion King all the way back in Camelot Singularity 6, and now this in Lostbelt 6, it's like, man, we just have so much Camelot Arthurian lore in Chaldea, bro. Next thing you know, we're about to see Albion. Nemo doesn't know who Albion is, and to be fair, I don't either. I don't know anything about Arthurian lore. So Holmes just basically explains that Albion is one of the last dragons to exist in history, right? And just basically giving all the details about him. They're talking about the logistics of how long the expedition crew really has left to finish this Lost Belt. Because remember, they're still on a timer. The whole thing is that the world is gonna end if Lost Belt 6 implodes. And so they're basically saying how they had 28 days under their belts and that they have 18 days in reality as an estimation to finish this Lost Belt without going over the limit by too much. But they are under a time crunch, is what Holmes is trying to say. But regardless, that moves us on to Camelot, back with the expedition crew. So we're back with the main crew after the aftermath of Norwich and everything. Mash is gone, and now they're reeling, trying to figure out what they're gonna do next, right? And since they got an invitation to Camelot from Queen Morgan herself, they just plan on going there next. Pepe and Oberon stay, deciding that they're gonna try to go after Spriggan, and Retrobit is gonna stay as well. If he goes there and he's assisting the Child of Prophecy, it's not gonna look good on her. And we also learned from Oberon himself that there were extra verses to the prophecy that Angel predicted all the way back in like the era of the fairy. But he deemed them unimportant, so he never mentioned them. And also, they contradicted it by saving Norwich when Norwich was predicted to be destroyed. Gawain and a bunch of knights from Camelot show up, and they're just like, all right, well, if you're all ready to go, then let's get out of here. And the people that are going are Fujimaru, Da Vinci, Artoria, Gareth, Muramasa, and Habitrot. Those are all the people. So they get in the carriages and they leave. And on their way, it basically predicted that it's going to take 2 days to get there. Lancelot shows up because a bunch of Moors are attacking the carriages on their way. We need the help. Queen Morgan herself sent her, so she helps. She destroys all the Moors, and then as quick as she came, she leaves. They camp out, and Fujibaru goes to talk to Gawain herself, and they're just having a chat about Gawain and her history, how she became a fairy knight, how she's a Fang Clan member, how she got the name of like the Black Dog, overall how she just eats the strong and everything. Learning more about her, her personality, just her as a fairy overall, and that she has a man, she has a husband, right? And how she's taking care of him. But overall, they have a nice chat, but she advises him to go back to his camp because they need to get as much rest as they can to get to Camelot, right? They wake up, they go to Camelot the next day. Here we get introduced to the city itself. And if you remember all the way back in Jerusalem, back when Camelot was being made, it looks a lot different, but obviously because the Lion King was the one that made that one, while Morgan made this one. So I just like the contrast and ideals overall. But on the other side, across from Camelot, we see the Northern Fairy clan, the King clan, with Knocknaria residing over it, right? And she's doing a training exercise where all the fairies are just standing watch, looking over at Camelot. And Gawain is just like, yeah, she's doing this as a display of power, showing that like if at any moment she's ready for war. But the only reason that Knocknaria doesn't get in trouble for that action is because she just dismisses it as a training exercise, so Morgan doesn't just immediately come after her. But people know that, like, yeah, at any moment she will be ready to rebel against Queen Morgan. Everybody gets ready to go visit the Queen, but the only people allowed are Fujimaru, Artoria, and Da Vinci because she's our advisor. So Habitrot, Muramasa, and Gareth aren't allowed to go in. We go in, we have a meeting with the Queen, And she's basically just saying, like, yeah, alright, you guys are my ops. I'm not going to have peace talks with you guys. You are invited guests, so you will not be harmed as long as you're guests in my kingdom. And if you decide to go ring the bells, Artoria, you will be viewed as an enemy and no longer a guest. It is, by all definitions, a declaration of war if you ring those bells. And Morgan's basically like, alright, besides that, ask me any questions that you want, but be careful because if you say anything that I don't like, you will not be viewed as guest anymore. And we basically ask her, alright, like, we're here because the world's ending and that this Lost Belt is going to collapse. And she's basically like, yeah. She describes that that was all planned, that Fairy Britain is going to end and it's going to be remade. She doesn't care about the fairies, she only cares about the land because fairies can always be reborn. She's not doing it out of cruelness, she's doing it because she's completely indifferent about fairies. She just wants her land to remain, you know? And since she's making it a world itself, that's how she's planning on doing it. She won't give them Rongo Miniad, and they're gonna have to pry it out of her dead hands if they want to have it. And to get her off the throne, they're gonna have to fight her, basically. So one more thing is that they want to know where Mash is. She tells them that she's safe, she's perfectly fine, but she won't tell them where she's at. So now they're asked to leave. And Barrel's there as well, basically saying that, like, yeah, she's my servant and all that, and she's going to kill them. But Morgan's like, yeah, no, you're not going to do that. So they leave, and then we see a scene with Morgan after everybody leaves. She's talking to the guy that looks like Romani that we saw in Lost Boat 5, right? And he's just basically like, congratulations on your magical achievements because I know nobody will give you the credit that you deserve. And what he's saying is true because she did all of this in 2,000 years. She's a literal magical anomaly. And you'll see more of that as the story progresses because Morgan literally is just like a well of magical energy. she tells him to leave because she feels like it's sarcasm. And then she also sees the foreign entity that watches over from the foreign god. And she's like, listen, if you're not going to say anything, then leave because I don't want you here. You don't do anything. Then we see Oberon and Retrobit. They come back and they're here to retrieve us after the meeting. And now we're heading off to Londinium. So it's been several hours since I recorded the last section that you just heard, since I'm recording this in segments. And man, I was just here spacing out to Minecraft music for a little bit, bro. Like, but regardless, now we're leaving Camelot, and the first thing that we see is a chocolate field, and this is close to the Northern Fairy territory. So everybody's eating this chocolate except for Muramasa and Gareth. And there we see Northern Fairies come and attack us, and then they take us away to Knocknaria's camp, right? The girl that we saw all the way back in Camelot, staring down the Camelot forces. And we find out that she's actually acquainted with Artoria because all the way back in Gloucester 5 years ago, they were both there for a contest on beauty. And since Murian usually she's the judge, Artoria didn't get really far. She didn't even get into the qualifying rounds. While Knocknaria herself, she got into the finals. And so Knocknaria sees Artoria and she's like, dang, why didn't you make it to the finals? Yo, what happened? And then she's just like, I don't know, I didn't make it to the qualifying. I guess I'm just not pretty. And then she's like, listen, those judges were unfair. They judged on external beauty and not the beauty of living your life the way that you want to. You should have been in the qualifying. And then after getting a further look at her, she's like, you know what? Maybe not. I think my intuition was wrong. But after that, they start talking about each other. For the next 2 to 3 days, they just become really good friends and rivals. And so that's why they know each other now in the present. But Knocknaria can't look past the treasonous act of eating from the chocolate field because chocolate is really important commodity here in the northern area. She insults Artoria's group and she's like, you should have gotten better people to surround yourself with. You know, you haven't changed. And Artoria's like, listen, these people are better than you know. All right. If anything, I bet they could beat your soldiers handedly. And she's like, all right, bet. Let's make it a wager then. If you beat me, then you get to go free. But if not, I keep Fujimaru. And that's basically how we get set free because we win. Regardless, they leave because Noctaria has some business to take care of with some refugees and everything from Sheffield. And everybody decides, all right, let's go to Londinium because Oberon hints at going there. We might find something there. We go on our way there, we camp out for a little bit, and Gareth decides to get some water. And on her way there, she meets a couple of Moors and she's defenseless, so she's trying her best to fight them, but she can't do anything. And then Percival, proper human history Percival who grew up here, so kind of like Gareth, comes out of nowhere and he defends her, right? and he's the leader of the Round Table army. So he's like, I'm so sorry that you got attacked like that, but here, let me give you some tips on your spear work, right? And so she's just super surprised and brings him over to Artoria. And they're all just like, oh, shoot, all right, bet then let's go over to Londinium even faster. So they get there and they meet all these types of people, the army, everybody, right? And then they get taken to the war room where they see a painting of Cernunnos, the god that created Fairy Britain. And they're talking about it, and Da Vinci comes up with the idea that if Cernunnos is here, who is a god, then they did have the idea of worshipping gods at some point in this history. So the fact that it doesn't exist now is really odd. But after talking about the painting and investigating a little bit on it, they go to the war room and they're talking about what they're going to do next. And they land on Norwich, right? Because Spriggan is having ideas revolting against Morgan and her army. So everybody's planning on what they should do, and they decide that because of what Spriggan's trying to do, they're gonna go over to Norwich. And since Pepe is there as well, he's getting people to help the Round Table army. We're gonna have 400 people from the Round Table and 400 people from Pepe that he's rounded up. And Artorio's like, you know what? I don't like the sound of this, but there is a bell over at Norwich, so we might as well get this over with now. Everybody prepares to go over to Norwich. So after leaving Londinium, we go over to Norwich, right? And this is where Percival drops some lore tidbits about his history, where we learn that he was adopted by one of the fairies and he was raised in Salisbury with a bunch of other human children. And he's just a normal human. So as he was given a loving and caring home, he didn't really hate any fairies growing up. And that never extended to anybody else, right? But as he grew up, he became a soldier and he went to Camelot because of a tournament. And he was a finalist, so he got to meet Queen Morgan. But the way that she acted, it made him turn away from Camelot and basically realize, like, yo, no, she's not right. She's not fit to be ruler. So we're gonna have an army, right? We're gonna rebel against Queen Morgan. And so this is where the Round Table army started. And then Oberon later comes around and is like, yo, listen, you aren't going to get anywhere if you're having a band of misfits like this, bro. Let me help you out. Let me organize a bigger group and then we can really get going. So this is why Oberon is kind of seen as like a de facto leader, but Oberon gives leadership to Percival. As they make it to Norwich, the forces split up into two. You have Artoria and Muramasa, you have Habitrot and Gareth in their own things. Da Vinci and Fujimaru are in their own garrison, basically helping out both groups. And Pepe, he's just like, all right, listen, I'm gonna help you guys out with these troops, right? We're gonna siege Spriggan. They managed to open the gate. They managed to get into his forces, and there's Camelot forces there as well, so they're taking care of them. But none of Spriggan's forces are there. And once we meet him, we see him at the bell. He's like, congratulations, you know, you made it here. And Artoria asks him what his motives are. He's basically just like, hey, at the end of the day, I didn't do anything. My forces didn't do anything. And if you kill me, then that means that you're going to make an enemy of Norwich because I'm still the de facto leader of this place. I bring in a lot of revenue and profit and do a lot for these people. And because I didn't go against you guys, that means that we were neutral. So I didn't rebel against Queen Morgan. This bell is completely unguarded. You can have it. Knowing this, Artoria goes to ring the bell, despite the fact that this is a declaration of war towards Morgan. Spriggan is a calculating, devious guy, you know, and the reason is because he's actually a human from proper human history who got transferred over to this fairy Britain, and he's a changeling now. He got cosmetic surgery done so he looks like a fairy and just goes through a bunch of things to make sure that he looks like one, right? But in reality, he doesn't care about Fairy Britain, nor the fairies, nor even himself. But regardless, that's the end of Norwich. Morgan, and she sends Woodrose to go to Londinium, one of the clan heads, and you have Lancelot and Gawain head to Wales, Oberon's forest. We get fragment number 5, where we continue with Mash, seeing where she disappeared to. All of this is to say that we find out she got sent back into the past 2,400 years ago, all the way back when Asek and Habitrot, which seems to be Totoro, or Tetra, I think is how you pronounce it. I don't know. She's with them now, and she's literally living out the history that we were learning about in the present. She got sent that far back by Morgan. We're gonna learn more about that in the future. So as we head into another section, we're on a carriage back to Londinium after going to Norwich, having all that stuff go down. We're going back there, and Artoria has a dream, right? And she's dreaming about her proper human history self, who was a king up until she died because of Mordred and Morgan's scheming. So she's dreaming and she's just thinking about how could you live a life like that? That just seems so hollow. I like Artoria's reaction to the stream because it shows that she's still so uncertain about the Child of Prophecy and why she has to go on this journey or why she should even go on this journey. For the most part, she's been doing this because she has to. You gotta remember, this has been hoisted onto her since birth, so she doesn't know any reason why except I just have to do it. It shows how conflicted she is in her heart. But she wakes up, they're still on the carriage, and they're talking about how horses could exist in Britain. And apparently, if there are multiple horses and fairies like that, fairies just would exist to be born, which doesn't really make sense to me. I don't get how that works. But if you understand, let me know in the comments below because that part kind of confused me. And even recording it now still doesn't really make sense to me. Fujimaru and Oberon look over at Artoria and they're wondering like what she's thinking about. But Oberon thinks that it's her wrestling with the fact that Morgan may be a good leader, besides the fact that she's a tyrant in some aspects. And that is a thing that I did want to talk about because you have Oberon's experience, right, where he saw all the bugs and all the fairies who were outcasted by Morgan because she hates bugs. Morgan, by all accounts and purposes, is a tyrant, but you look at the good that she's done for Fairy Britain as well, like protecting them from calamities, giving them places to stay, and overall, while she only cares about the land and she hates the fairies, she still cared for them, you know? And not in like a, oh, I like you guys, more like, you guys are residents of Fairy Britain, so I will protect you, because this is my kingdom, I am the ruler. And so instead of making her just a bad Lost Belt king, and not bad like in, oh, terribly written, no, I mean bad as in she's evil. They made her a gray character. Kinoko Nasu made her a gray one. Where people in Fairy Britain think that her sins weigh more, but they still don't take for granted the fact that she's helped them out. At the very least on the surface level, because fairies still manage to take for granted what she's done for them. And while this pilgrimage is meant to overthrow Morgan, that doesn't mean that we don't witness what she's done, how cracked she really is as a Lost Belt king, and how she was able to just change this Lost Belt so quickly. Bugs that Morgan casted out, they went over to the Welsh Forest, and when Oberon was summoned, there was around the same time that Beryl showed up, and when he summoned Morgan. And so they protected him, they covered him with light because he was just basically like an infant at this point. Not physically, but that man didn't have much, right? And so to repay them, he's taking care of them and he's going to overthrow Morgan. But as we continue on with our journey, we go to Londinium after seeing that Woodrose's forces are going to attack. And we got word of this. So when we came back, we just basically like, yeah, we're going to defend Londinium for as long as we can. We're going to fight Woodrose because we can't hold out a defense for long. It'll only be 10 days. And so their plans are basically like, yeah, Norwich is going to send some forces. But later we find out that like fairies are still scared of going over there because Artoria only rang one bell in Norwich. It's not enough to motivate them to come over yet. The group is just here defending Londinium as best as they can while they wait to see what Woodrose does because at the end of the day, it's kind of like a war of attrition. While Londinium has less forces, they still have the upper hand because they're being sieged. Like, hey, whatever they do, we can always counter, you know, as long as we're vigilant. Meanwhile, on Woodrose's side, see him talking to Beryl and Tristan how Morgan ordered him not to attack. He's furious, but then he realizes like, all right, fine. If the queen wants it, then I won't attack. Beryl, obviously being scum, he's like, dang, I really thought he was gonna attack. All right, well, if that's the case, then stay here for a little bit. And Tristan agrees too. They're gonna stay here for a bit. After like a day or two of them waiting in Londinium, they get word from people that like, yo, Gawain and Lancelot are going to attack the Welsh forest because they know that the Welsh forest is allied with the Round Table Army because Oberon is there, right? And so Oberon, ready to just go and brawl right now, he forgets to realize that we're gonna help him out too. So Fujimaru and everybody's like, yeah, let's go help out. And so we send some of our forces over there to the Welsh forest to stop Gawain and Lancelot. So as we rush over to the Forest of Wales, we meet Gawain. We see her burning down the forest and everything. Lancelot's being a part of it, and we split our forces, right? So Percival, Gareth, and Muramasa are in one group. Meanwhile, Artoria, Fujimaru, Oberon, and Da Vinci are in another. Nobody was left behind in Londinium. We just left the soldiers that were already there, so none of the important characters. This fight boils down to us beating Gawain, Artoria revealing her name because of Hector, one of the heroes from the Age of Aesek, and her name is Bargus, so I can finally say her name. I've been cutting out all the times I've said her name to not spoil people, But man, it's hard to when you have the servant card and it just says it right there. We haven't revealed Lancelot's name yet, but that will come soon, so don't worry. Even after we reveal her name, it doesn't matter. Bargus is still just as strong, if not stronger than what she was before, so we have an even more difficult time. But we managed to fell her. She's not dead, but we managed to convince her basically like, yo, listen, we're not here to destroy Fairy Britain. We know you care about this place. We know you care about the fairies, but we're not here to destroy it. We're here to save it because we don't even need to destroy it regardless. So we weren't going to anyways. And Da Vinci's just trying her best to convince her like, yo, we're not the bad guys here in terms of like fighting against Morgan. Because you know that Morgan, her justice goes against fairies, their very existence. Because she's going to use the calamities to basically destroy them, right? Fairies aren't Morgan's priority. And so we managed to tell Barkus, just give her the truth, or at the very least, the truth of what we're trying to do. Because it's not like we're trying to play mind games with her. We're legit telling her, like, this is what we're doing. This is how we're going to do it. It's just that Morgan herself declared us her enemy. So you had to fight us. One of Morgan's soldiers who came along the way, his name is Portions. He tried to attack Fujimaru, but Bargus protected him because Fujimaru tried to protect her. And so he's basically like, treason, I'm gonna go tell her, kill him now if you are loyal. And she's like, nah, I'm not gonna kill him. And so he leaves, basically trying to snitch on her. And Bargus is like, well, the mission's done, so I'm gonna head back. And so she leaves. And Oberon's just here, depressed, like really depressed, because the forest is dead. All the people in it are dead, and all he can do is just mourn. And so we leave him to be. Muramasa helps him bury the people, but Artoria's like, but there's no point. They're gonna go back, and so does Gareth. Like she says the same thing. And fairies, when they die, their bodies don't disappear like in proper human history. It's really just they turn into the ground itself. Britain is built on the bodies of fairies. So, as we move on to Fragment 6, we go back to MASH, her being 2,000 years back into the past, and we have her, meet Asek in the last fragment. So here, we're just talking to her, learning more about what's going on in his current time, and basically, it's right before Uther's coronation, the king, the human king, who's going to lead change in Fairy Britain, right? And ASEC makes it clear from the very beginning, like, yo, do not tell us about your time. Because if you want to be able to go back to your future, you cannot tell us a single thing, or at the very least, a minimum. You're going to forget your memories if you tell us. While the future isn't going to change because the High Queen made sure of that, it doesn't matter. Like, you still need to be sure that you don't tell us anything. So Mash is like, alright, after like having told them a little bit, and she still messes up from time to time. But basically, this fragment is them telling us about the current events going on in Fairy Britain. Like us beating Ector, us beating Habitra, or also known as Todorot, and again ASEC. And then we go down to the pit. We're gonna investigate it because ASEC is just like, we have somebody here who can help us investigate because nobody knows what's going down there. And the weirdest part about it is that nobody questions why it's even here. Why is there a giant hole in Fairy Britain that nobody goes to? Why is it even here? The fairies are just scared of it. They don't understand it, and so they don't even want to investigate it. But ASEC is different, and she wants to go see what's going on. Like, why is it here? Her and Mash prepare to go down there, and that's the end of the fragment. So as we're leaving the Welsh Forest, we go over to Salisbury to regroup basically, and since Percival is the leader of the Round Table Army, he can't stay there because that would cause allegiance issues with Morgan and Aurora, since Aurora doesn't align with any of their values and they're just completely at their core different from each other. He can't stay there. We're here with everybody else who was left, right? They go to the bar where Da Vinci was working at before we caught up with her, and then she was basically like, yeah, go ahead and ring the bell. You stopped the calamity in Norwich from happening, so let's keep true to our word. So we ring it and then we leave. We head back to Londinium and we hear from Aurora like in their own thing where it's basically like, alright, so how are we gonna move forward? And Aurora's just basically like, until Artoria rings all six of the bells, we're gonna stay neutral as possible. If the Londinium forces lose the battle with Woodwose, she's gonna take in refugees from that battle, but she's not going to help them. She still has to stay neutral, right? And Coral, her assistant, she's basically like, but isn't that gonna endanger Salisbury? And she's like, at the end of the day, these are my ideals. She's gonna stick to them. And so they're all basically just acting in the interest of Salisbury, but it doesn't mean that their interests don't mean helping people. That's her core values at the end of the day. So as we head back to Londonium now, after having a little sparring session with Oberon, which I thought was crazy unfair, because you either had to choose with A, I'm gonna side with Oberon if Fujimaru, if I'm not gonna side with him if you don't want to. But no matter what you choose, you still have to play as Oberon. So it's like, dog, what? Hold on, so what does it even matter? Hold on. We go back to Londinium. There's a lot of Norwick forces here, and we're basically just regrouping, trying to figure out what we're gonna do, right? And Pepe's here, and he's just like, yo, let's talk, let's have a discussion. And so Fujimaru, Percival, and a couple other people join us in the war room talks to talk about how they're gonna go forward, right? And Pepe is basically just talking about how, like, hey, I'm here to kill Barrow, right? And since Fujimaru's here, he's gonna want to come over here. So I'm gonna have you guys there, and my goal is just to kill him. All right. We'll help you guys out, but I am a selfish person, so that's what I'm going to do. And Pepe, I want to mention, always looks down on himself because of his history that we learned about in Lostbelt 4, where he's actually a Japanese person who was in a clan that was just filled with a bunch of killers, and they just tried to make the perfect specimens type people. They would get stronger through the generations, and Pepe was one of them, right? Itachi'd his clan, and now he just views himself as a killer, no different from Barrel. But Barrel is sadistic. Pepe does it out of his own morals and volitions, right? While he's not proud of them, he still acts on them. During that conversation with Pepe, they basically start divulging the details behind what this Lost Boat really is. Since the Lost Boat tree has been gone for a very long time, this world isn't Lost Boat anymore. It's literally a lost world, basically. It has the strength to compete with proper human history because it has an established history that goes past way over like 10,000 years compared to other Lost Boats, which didn't have a lot of time to really be there. Or if they did, it was nowhere near as long as this one because the Lost Boat tree was still there. Morgan cut the Lost Boat tree, it had to have been like the first year of her rule, or at least that's what Da Vinci hypothesizes, right? And so Pepe having an idea is just basically like, what if you guys took the fairies from this Lost Belt and brought them over to proper human history? The fairies, just like the Lost Belt, have proper human strength in terms of like they're stable enough to exist in our world since they're not tied to the Lost Belt anymore. This is Morgan's world, basically. Fujimaru and Da Vinci thinking about like, hey, like we genuinely could do that and that'd be kind of sick. And Artoria is put with the position like, all right, so do you want to leave now and you can live with us, living out your days in proper human history along with other humans and stuff like that? Or do you want to fight Morgan at the cost of it coming with your life and stuff like that, like still taking that risk? And Percival's even like, listen, whatever you choose to do, I'm just happy that you helped us out. We're still gonna fight Morgan, but regardless of what you do, I'm thankful for what you've done. And Artori's just basically like, I'm gonna stick and fight with the Round Table Army at this point because we come too far. I'm gonna commit. And everybody's like, all right, well that's the decision then. And Percival's like, all right, well that aside, I'm gonna go train up the new recruits that we got. We're gonna have exclusive groups decide where we're gonna go attack and all that. We're gonna plan out the attack, right? The night before the decisive battle, excuse me. Percival leaves and that leaves everybody else here in the room. After that talk in the war table room, we have some discussions with other people like Fujimaru and Habitat. Basically just telling Fujimaru like, yo, you're gonna be reunited with Mash, don't worry. Artoria is the key to that, so we're gonna make sure that she comes back and you don't die until that point. Like Habitat swears on it. Meanwhile, Muramasa and Artoria are talking. Muramasa basically just saying like, yo, you aren't cut out for fighting, you're tired, blah 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 blah. And Artoria just suppressing what she really feels and just saying like, yo, listen, I'm fine, don't worry about it. We also get to see Gareth and Percival training each other, helping each other out. And Gareth and how her impact on the children, they really taken a liking to her. So it's kind of boosting morale in the troops. Da Vinci and Fujimura have a conversation to themselves, right? After everything's said and done. And it's about the humans in this Lost Belt, how they're different from proper human history. Da Vinci basically tells Fujimura, like, the humans in this Lost Belt can't go back to proper human history. They can't go there because humans here were made from one single person. Like, they're clones of that original human being, right? And because the Lost Belt tree was there while they were being made, and no original human has been made since then, they're literally all just different variations of that same person's DNA. No human from this Lost Belt could come over there. Because while new fairies were made after the Lost Belt tree was cut down, no new human has existed ever since that one human's DNA was cloned and just rearranged every time to make new humans. Humans can't reproduce because of that, and they have limited lifespans. So literally, they're treated like animals, like slaves because of that. So only the fairies can come over to proper human history, not the humans. And this is where the lore just enhances the story so much more. Because you would be thinking, like, alright, why can't the fairies and the humans come on the store border? But you wouldn't know the reason why. And the fact that it's a clone, only DNA running through all the humans in this Lost Belt is so unique and creative. And overall, it's just so dark. Like, the very concept of it, like other concepts in this Lost Belt, are just like, man, I needed a break to just really think about what I just read. She also mentions the Celtic god Hernunos, who they have a picture of them in this Lost Belt, and so she's interested because they don't have ideas of religion in this Lost Belt, at least the current day. So the fact that Hernunos is here and the fact that they were worshiping him like a god makes it seem like there was a sense of religion here at some point. But Hernunos isn't here, or at the very least hasn't been for a long time, so they wonder where he is. And that will become very important later on. So we cut away to Camelot, where Vargas is there now, Tristan is there, and Lancelot is there. They're talking to Morgan and all that, and all the fairies there, and the council, and all the other people are there as well. And they're basically just trying to decide Vargas's sentence. And Morgan just decides, like, yo, you're gonna be confined to your area, Manchester, and you may be called upon, but that's basically where you're gonna be because you betrayed me. So we basically are stripping away your title in a sense, since her title was already stripped away by Artoria because she revealed her name. Lancelot defends Vargas, at least from Tristan, because Lancelot believes she did a great job no matter what. She did do the job that she was sent to do, even if she was defeated by Artoria. But regardless, some people suggest, like, why doesn't Vargas just fight for us instead, right? Help Woodrose and everything. And Morgan's too prideful to let that happen. It doesn't matter. Woodrose is good enough to fight by himself. He doesn't need it. She has complete trust in Woodrose. Krista was making fun of Vargas, but again, Lancelot defended her, and so she goes after the meeting to talk to Beryl, and Beryl's talking to somebody, getting information on what's going on in the round table, like, battle. Tristan walks in, he starts slobbering, bro, literally glazing her. It's disgusting how much meat writing he was doing, but I can see why. I don't even know. I don't like it, bro. I literally just don't like Barrow no matter what. And not even like he's written badly. It's just that the story makes me not want to like him no matter what. I think that's a good thing. While they're talking, no, Tristan's just basically like, oh yeah, no, isn't Mother great? Like, she's awesome. He's like, yeah, like, she's a top rating witch and all that stuff. Like, she's the best of the best, the strongest he's ever seen. And Tristan's wondering about Fujimaru, like, how strong is he, like, with the servants and everything. And he's just like, Fujimaru's top rate, like, definitely a great master because of Kashtaria, the battle with him, and how he was able to beat him not just off of good servants and IQ alone. Fujimaru got that off of his own merit. And I really like that because even Barrow can acknowledge that the battle between Kerstaria was not just a fluke, even though I would have thought it was because that fight was really hard. So it really just makes me sad that Kerstaria wasn't the final Lost Belt guy. And not like I don't think David should be, because David is fire and I really can't wait to see what he does. But it just makes me so sad remembering what happened to Kerstaria because his story was one of the best. Like, if anything, probably the best up to this point for the cryptors. Lost Belt 5 was carried by Kerstaria's story, at the very least for me, in terms of Olympus, because I love Atlantis. The two end that conversation with us ending the section, going on to the Londinium defense battle. So as we reach the new section, this is the battle for Londinium. And so we have two forces. We have Percival's force going behind Woodrose's camp to attack him, and we have our force, Londinium, defending against the push that Woodrose is trying to make, right? And so it basically leads to just a bunch of skirmishes going on. We have Gareth, where we see her defending some of the children that she met throughout the time she spent in Londinium, where they even made some armor for her, and that's how she got to, like, her other ascension and everything. We basically just get to see her take the role of knight so seriously, the way that Percival does, and just act like one, right? Defending the weak, protecting what she can, and overall just fighting against the strong. And it was really nice. I like the development that Gareth gets here. But we see Muramasa, Fujimaru, and Da Vinci fighting against some of the soldiers, while Artoria has her incantations cast across the battlefield, since at the end of the day she is a support. She's trying to reach as many as she can, but she can't reach everybody. While Percival goes behind Woodrose's group and he starts attacking him, Woodrose is just wondering where in the world are Morgan's support, where are they? And Percival's just like, I don't know, I didn't see any. So Woodrose is just like, alright, bet, whatever. I'm gonna kill you then. because Woodrose was actually there raising Percival for a little bit before he got adopted by the woman, right? Because he was being trained and everything. So they have some connection. But Percival starts attacking him, and he uses the sphere selection to try and hurt Woodrose because Woodrose is an array, aka a werewolf, but only wolf. So he has like the human stature, but he's still a wolf at the end of the day. And Percival's attack doesn't even face him because the Fang clan are just some of the strongest fairies out there, period. They're the defenders of Britain, of Fairy Britain. So that attack did nothing to him, and now they're just wondering, what do we do? And Woodrose kills everybody because Gareth got a vision. And she's been getting visions for a long time now throughout the story of her seeing everybody either die or something bad happen. She even used it in the Wales Forest. So as soon as Gareth sees this vision, she makes haste over to where Woodrose and Percival are fighting, as well as us going over there as well right before she showed up. So she stabs into Woodrose's skin, and this time it actually penetrates while the spear selection didn't before. So now it sets up for Percival to stab at him, damaging Woodrose enough to send them packing over to the River of Tears. And so they manage to beat him, and they send him running to the River of Tears, where Percival executes him there, where Percival learns, like, yeah, I was the one that helped raise you, you know. And Percival knows this, you know. He's like, yeah, you know, I appreciate everything that you've done for me, and I'm not doing this out of malice. So he apologizes to his father, and he's just like, he gets it done, you know. He kills him, and he goes back to the army, and everybody celebrates, like, yeah, we did it. We took out Woodrose's army. We lost 20% of our soldiers, but we cooked. And what we see is Barrow interested in talking to Woodrose, basically like, yo, listen, you're not dead, because he got up and it wasn't enough to kill him, but it was definitely enough to severely wound him, right? And so they're talking to him, and Barrow basically takes a part of Woodrose and eats it because he's a witch, you know, he uses witchcraft and all that. And Tristan helps put him down, like, as in, like, restrain him. And Barrow let Tristan use some magecraft that he learned from his grandmother. The thing that he didn't tell her is that it rots the person's soul. So Tristan feels really icky when using that magecraft, right? But after that, we see everybody else's opinion on what's going on, what happened with Woodrose, because his defeat is spreading like wildfire. So we see Aurora's perspective on it, and she's actually talking to somebody from Morgan's army. Then we see Murian and Konyaskanya talking as well, how Konyaskanya is going to go somewhere where Albion's corpse is. And the reason she knows about it is because Oberon sold that information to her. And we'll learn more about that later. And then we also get to see Nocnaria's perspective and how she's proud of Artoria, but also that she's happy to have a rival that can rival her like that. Aurora is actually defending Woodrose and all that, even though we know, like, yeah, Aurora basically manipulated Woodrose from some flashbacks that we saw. He feels like he was betrayed after he got severely wounded because he saw Retrobit, aka Aurora's horse, with the Round Table army. So it's like, what's going on? He's trying to piece things together, but he just dismisses it as like, oh, maybe the horse defected is all. Maybe Aurora doesn't know what's going on. On top of that, Morgan didn't send troops for him. So he's just like in a constant state of confusion and pain right now. But regardless, that's the end of Londinium attack. You know, we won, and now we're gonna go to Gloucester because we got an invitation from Murian. So as we move on to Fragment 7 after the Battle of Londinium, I want to mention that all the fragments that we've read so far have been really cute, really interesting, really sad, or really informative to the world that we live in, right? Fragment 7 is no different. We learned so much about this world and its history from the people that are currently living in it 2,000 years ago. It starts off with Mash talking to Asek, learning more about the world that she's currently in, where again, Uther's going to be coronated in a couple months. And while they're trying to investigate the pit down below, Asek is telling Mash, like, yeah, so the reason why people think that I've been reincarnated continuously isn't because it actually happens. I've just been sleeping whenever I'm not there, you know, whenever I'm not needed. Because people hate me, you know, like people really do not like me because after the calamities are done and I save them, they think that I'm the one that's gonna be the next, you know, because I'm the fairy of paradise. So they want to kill me if anything. But she believes that Uther is going to be the one that issues change, and that changes the need for her to leave because humans and fairies are going to coexist, basically. She also mentions what I mentioned earlier, where fairies are the groundwork for Britain. And what she means by that is basically every time fairies fight, they don't decompose and disappear, or they don't disappear like fairies do, period. They just stay there, you know, and then they become one with the land. So Fairy Britain got bigger because all the fairies that were fighting, because all the wars that were going on. because there were a bunch of wars happening before the Age of the Queen. So all those bodies and all those fairy lives lost expanded Britain and made it what it is today. So Britain is literally built on a mound of dead bodies. It's dark. It's definitely dark, and Lost Belt 6 has its fair share of just dark tones because every Lost Belt has, since it's meant to be a play on humanity where things diverted. And in reality, most of them aren't better than what humanity is. In some aspects, there are, but in other times, they aren't. And Lost Belt 6 is no different. So as Asek is telling Mash all this stuff, they decide to call it for a night, and then Mash is talking to Habitrar, or at least the one that's here, and it turns out she doesn't know how to sew yet, and she has terrible memories, so she forgets all the instructions on how to sew. So Mash is just like, alright, how about you keep a diary then? But Habitat doesn't know how to write. And so Mash is just like, hey, I don't know how to write either, in terms of your language at least, so why don't we learn together? And then at a certain point, it'll become muscle memory, so you won't even have to remember how to do it, you'll just instinctually do it. And when I keep calling her Habitat, I mean like this is Totoro. I call her that because they literally look the exact same. And I have a theory on what she's going on. But regardless, don't worry about it. This is Totoro in the fragments. In the present day, it's Habitat. As the next day rolls around, though, they get to the pit and they have Mash descend by having Totoro hold on to Mash, and Asek is there with magic in case that if anything goes bad. Mash gets down after an hour of descending to like 7,000 meters. There's ash coming up, it's billowing up, and things aren't looking too good, right? The only reason she's breathing right now is because of Galahad's protection in her spirit core. As she gets down to 7,400, though, she passes out, and they tell Totoro, like, yo, we need to pull her up now. And so Asek and all of them pull her back up, and then they bring her to Salisbury because she was unconscious for mad long. So they managed to cure the curse that was put on her by the thing down there, and we know it's Hernanos down there. Asek is basically just like, well, if it's not solved then, surely it'll be solved in the future, even though you told us like it's not solved in the future. At some point we'll act to make sure that things go good because that's a threat down there, like that's a curse. So we need to make sure that it's done, it's gone after the coronation. And that's the end of Fragment 7. We move on now to Gloucester, Part 2. So as I mentioned earlier before Fragment 7, Murian invited Artoria and Fujimaru to her ball. This ball is prestigious because it's been held before, and Murian, taking this time to hold another ball, especially this one of this grandeur, decides to invite as many people as she can, whether it's the Queen, her knights, Fujimaru, the Child of Prophecy, Aurora, people like that, they're not the only ones that are going to be there. So they head off from Londinium because it's literally going to be held the same day, so they have to rush over to Gloucester, right? As they get to Gloucester, they only have two invitations and one extended invitation for a guest. So it's going to be Artoria, Muramasa, Fujimaru, and Da Vinci. Oberon's going to sneak in because he's a master of disguise and deception. Or he's going to snuggle up with somebody who doesn't have somebody to come with them, right? That leaves Gareth and Habitrot to go off to Pepe's shop since this is Gloucester. They're going to go over there and just have a nice time, chill out. Meanwhile, Percival and Redrabit are going to wait outside of Gloucester because they wouldn't be allowed in there anyways. They weren't invited. So they go into the ball. Artoria has reservations, but they convince her to go in. And here we see a bunch of guests, right? We see Bargust, we see Aurora with a knight with white hair, which sounds familiar, wink wink. And we have Beryl and Tristan, right? And then Miriam's gonna show up late, so they didn't worry about her not yet. What we learn about this ball is that it's actually a reality marble because the inside is a lot bigger than the outside, so Da Vinci deduces that. But as we're talking, we see a bunch of guests, and Aurora's attendant, Coral, comes up to them and she's just like, yo, listen, people aren't going to be able to tell that it's you guys if they haven't met you yet because it's a sort of magic that Miriam put over the ball. So the only people that recognize you are going to come talk to you, right? And then Da Vinci's like, hey, listen, I know that you like humans, don't you? And then Coral's like, don't you dare insult me like that ever again. I'm going to kill you. And then she leaves. But in reality, I kind of think so too because she told Fujimaru, like, yeah, listen, you can't talk to people like that here. Because while I'm used to it, and so is Aurora and other people that may have met you, other fairies that don't know you will not be used to that. So just be careful, alright? That's like a warning. And that's why Da Vinci says it. The white haired lady comes up, and it turns out to be Fairy Knight Lancelot. She came with Aurora, right? And they have a history together. And so she's talking to everybody here, asking what's going on. So one thing I found interesting about Lancelot is that her personality is just so different from what I would have thought it was gonna be. And that goes for all of them except for Tristan. Tristan always gave me that like kind of mean vibe. Vargas herself, I thought was just gonna be like a warrior type character where she just has no regard for other people and just wants to fight. But in reality, she's pretty stalwart and acts like a knight. Even though her title is the Black Dog, she still cares for the fairies. And even though she eats the strong, she does protect the weak. She has that survival of the fittest, but instead of feasting on the weak, she protects them and feasts only on the strong. Lancelot herself though does enjoy fighting, but she serves Morgan at the end of the day, right? So she does follow orders. She is a stalwart soldier, but she doesn't have the same morals as Vargas does, right? Lancelot cares only about her people and her people alone. So just remember that going forward. As Lancelot is talking to all of them, she maintains a fold over her face so that people don't recognize her. Our group doesn't realize it's her until she removes it, right? And then she's talking to all of them, asking if they made Coral mad because Da Vinci was just prodding and poking at her to see her morals and everything and all that. Coral actually revealed that Lancelot is the second in command to Aurora, at least in terms of like kinship and all that. So when Lancelot shows up, she always goes second in command as like her attendant for Aurora. And then Coral gives up her spot, even though Coral hates her, like completely despises her, quote unquote says, even though she's a creature from mud. She asks Fujimaru how Percival is, and Fujimaru's just like, yeah, he's fine, he's doing good. They all wonder, why would you ask that? Why do you care? And she says, because Percival's her sibling, right? And then she leaves, and that's it. And everybody's just like, but why would you say that? Why would you tell us this? We are the enemy, we are your ops. Because she doesn't see them as a threat, or because she generally just cares about Percival, and she's kind of dense besides that sense. So everybody's just like, listen, Percival didn't tell us that for a reason, so we're not gonna ask him about it or tell him anything about it because he wanted to keep that a secret for a reason, right? Especially if it's gonna affect army morale. So we're just gonna leave that there. They're not colluding with each other. It doesn't matter. Vargas is at this ball as well, and she asks if they could see her. So everybody leaves after Lancelot leaves and goes to Vargas. As they talk to Vargas, she's basically just wondering what's their goal here, because even though she heard it in the Forest of Wales, she still wants to understand really what's going on. And so Da Vinci takes the time to explain to her the Lostbelts, why they're here, and how the battle between Britain and proper human history is really a world to world battle. The humans themselves aren't here to just kill all the fairies and then leave. At the end of the day, they're trying their best to survive, and if it means that they can save lives in the process, they'll try it as well. They don't mind taking on fairies from Britain if they can. This soothes Vargas's mind though because she just wants to protect the fairies and she wants to discuss more about this topic at her mansion, so she formally invites them to there. Even though she's been relieved of her duties as a fairy knight, she still can fight. It's just that she's not under Morgan's direct orders anymore. So she leaves. Oberon managed to sneak in and he's talking to them. And basically, he's like, if you're gonna go to Vargas's mansion, just know the rules of there, the survival of the fittest type stuff. While Oberon still has his reservations and hatred for Vargas burning down the Welsh forest, he doesn't go against them going towards there. To where the bell was being held, Artoria manages to lockpick it. Here she tells us more about Merlin, this version's Merlin and all that, and that she's being held by Morgan. And also the reason why they would even need to have lockpicking here in the first place. And that's because Morgan made her own form of currency here. People picked it up as a side thing, and Artoria was one of them. They show up, and it turns out that this is the main event, the bell being rung, and Murian played on this. We had Beryl and Tristan show up, along with Fujimaru and Artoria showing up. And Artoria immediately does not want to do this, but Muramasa and Fujimaru both go up and it's like, listen, you gotta do this. I'll be here with you. So it's Fujimaru and her versus those two, right? Artoria has her new dress and she's ready to fight Tristan. Whoever wins, Artoria rings the bell, and if she doesn't, then Tristan just embarrassed her. They fight, Artoria wins. In the process, Tristan's name is revealed to be Babon Sith, the vampire from Darlington. And so they all shame her and they cast her out. And they hate her, because they all hate Tristan before. They would hate her even more if she was Babon Sith. Beryl is just there after Tristan leaves and he's just like, yo, I mean, you can kill me now. I don't have Tristan here, so it is what it is, right? And Fujimaru is way smarter than that. He's just like, yeah, no, I'm not stupid, Doug. I'm not doing that. And so he's like, all right, smart of you, smart of you. If that's the case, then I'll be waiting in Camelot, Doug. I'll see you there. They both don't feel good about that win because seeing how Tristan was treated just doesn't feel good. And also, this isn't how they really wanted to get it. They would have just wanted to leave and dip after getting it. Miriam now recognizes Artoria as the child of prophecy, so she rang the bell, and while she remains neutral, she will not be helping the Round Table army. She does recognize her, and that's good enough. So now that's 3 bells rang in her journey. Now they're talking with Marion, and basically they're like, "Yo, so where's Konya?" And she's like, "Yeah, she's off on business." After looking at Oberon, realizing like, "Yeah, I know your secret." But after all that's said and done, Marion basically just tells him to leave because I recognized you. I'm still gonna be neutral, so don't bother me. I'm gonna be reading my books now. And so they all leave. Fujimaru though asked Oberon where he was the night before the Londonian battle happened. And basically he was striking up a deal with Konya the night before in Gloucester. And that deal basically entailed Woodrose's reinforcements from Queen Morgan being dispatched by Konya, making him think that he was left to die by the Queen. In exchange, Konya got details on Albion, the last dragon to ever exist, in probably human history and in here. So, after learning all that from Oberon, we cut away to Spriggan, the Norwick leader, right? Now we get to learn about his story, his past, and everything like that. So he's actually a fairy from proper human history. And I mentioned that earlier back in the Norwick chapter. So he was actually a Japanese student who snuck aboard the forward exchange ship on the way to Britain during like the 19th century, I think. And on his way there, while the pruning was happening, he switched over to the Fairy Britain by accident. Like, he doesn't know how it happened, and he still doesn't till this day. But because of that, he had to find a way to exist in Fairy Britain. So after 30 years of being a slave, he was now 55 years old, and he found a way to keep living by dissecting fairies and finding a way to slow his aging and using like prosthetic surgery, all this stuff to look like a normal fairy, right? So after working as the Earth Clan's assistant, he managed to kill that Earth Clan and take his name, right? After forming a business of Spriggan and Capless, right? So he managed to take his name. And after that, he's become Spriggan, the leader of Norwick. So after that, he's talking with one of the people, one of the soldiers in Norwick after all this anti-Morgan sentiments have been riling up. The soldier's basically like, who would you want to rule Britain? And Spriggan's like, I would want a queen who's nice, also wicked in her ways in equal amounts, you know? I would want someone so smart but yet so stupid to not realize, you know? And they're like, but I don't think a person like that would be able to defeat Britain, you know? And then Spriggan, remembering proper human history, had a queen rule over England. He's like, well, only a queen will be able to rule, you know? After that, though, we cut away to Tristan, and she's back in New Darlington, and she's just having a tantrum, you know? She's like, yo, listen, if I had Magecraft, I would have been able to win, blah, blah, blah. I'm so salty, type stuff. In a bitter fit of rage, she goes and captures a relic, the garden, and then she's going to use that. I don't know how, but we'll find that out in the later sections. But now we go on to Manchester.